What are the big issues that are facing us at this present time? What are the big issues, the big problems? I put out a few things to try and sense what people's thoughts were on this. I spoke to some people in the Hazard community page, spoke to some of my friends on Facebook, some people on Twitter that I know, and also we've had lots of prayer requests over the weeks about lockdown, and that's really given us a flavour for what some of the big problems are in Winterley, Haslington and Cheshire as a whole. So I'm going to share some of those with you. I've taken off the names of all these people, but I hope that reading their comments will give you a bit of a sense for what is going on at the moment. Firstly, unemployment is a massive issue. I was chatting to a guy who is a pastor in a more deprived area, and he was saying, I reckon unemployment is a bigger issue for us than it is for you. And I said to him, actually, I think it might even be the opposite. Maybe people would have struggled with employment in poorer areas before, but now, in Winterley in particular, in our church, there are many people who have been facing unemployment, maybe for the first time. We had this prayer request come through the other day. Obviously, there's lots of things that are difficult in there, but one of them is financially struggling when having a baby. You know, it's the kind of thing that you wouldn't even be thinking of at any other time, but at the moment that is an issue. And again, can I ask for prayers for employment? And I know there are many people in our church who have lost jobs or who've gone on furlough. And the longer these lockdowns go on, the more that's going to be an issue. The more people are going to be struggling with employment. Companies can't go on keeping people on furlough forever. The government can't go on paying for furlough forever. And some people, they're not attached to a company. They're self-employed. And if their stream of income is taken away, then that's going to be a big issue. I was speaking to my hairdresser the other day, not the time I got this one done, but before. And he reckoned that if he went into lockdown again, he might not be able to come back. Well, that's happened. And it's a big issue for lots of people. So unemployment is a real issue in our community. Is that the case for you? I wonder. Loneliness. Now, I've not got any good quotes for you here, but loneliness is a big issue. Two things that I've seen come up in particular. One is young parents, young mums. That's the case for my wife at the moment. She has a 2-year-old at home. There's no baby clubs on. There's none of the usual things that give people a bit of a break from routine. And I think mums are suffering in particular. We have had loads and loads of requests, messages to our Facebook page. Is Little Fishes restarting again? We're looking for something. We're desperate for something. We had someone contact us from Macclesfield who's in contact with loads of mums and saying, we're trying to find somewhere for mums to go. And the reality is that there's not much going on. And so mums, and we've found in the history of our church that mums are quite a vulnerable group anyway. It's very easy to feel quite isolated. They need that support network through Little Fishes. They're particularly lonely at this time. And also the elderly too. Elderly people often struggle with loneliness, but it's even more at the moment. Some people in our church who are widowed or are widowers, and they're unable to have people come round to support them. Lots of grandparents missing the interaction with their children, missing all the usual things like U3A and going out for walks and things like that. Some of them have been pretty much in lockdown ever since this began. Loneliness is a real issue, and I saw a statistic the other day. I don't have this statistic to hand out. I'll maybe look it up and I can leave it in the comments later. That the effects of loneliness are equal to something like smoking 30 a day, the health impact of loneliness, because our bodies are not made to be lonely. It's a big issue. It just sounds like something minor, something like a child on the playgrounds might struggle with. But it's a real issue. Maybe you're feeling that. Mental health issues. Here's a few things that have come into our page, or people have spoken to me. One person said mental health is key to helping people recover, as around 1 in 5 people are probably suffering from some level of mild to acute anxiety, as well as symptoms like insomnia. That's a big issue at the moment. It's already was an issue. Yeah, and that's what this person here says in the second one. Mental health was already a huge issue. The situation has had such a terrible impact on it. I've been mostly dealing with suicide and suicidal people throughout the pandemic. poor mental health is not going away any time soon. We obviously aren't going to know the impact of this for a long time, but I think informally I can say it's a bigger problem from what we're seeing in the church. Here's someone came when someone joins our Instagram, I tend to sort of send them a message and say, great to have you with us. Why have you signed up for our page? And one person said this. I think the website is just some weird thing that's come up, but I'm struggling terribly with my mental health and may start coming to your church for support and comfort. This is one of the issues that's going on. We're struggling with mental health. It's being spoken about more frequently, which can only be a good thing. But it is a very difficult issue. And the issue of suicide is massive. I'm aware of someone in our wider community, a younger man, probably similar age to myself, who committed suicide, and nobody knew what he was going through at that time. That is a horrendous thing. An issue that's related, no doubt, to the inability to talk to friends and family. It's a massive, massive issue. By the way, if you do have anything to say, I will occasionally just check in at the comments. I will be a little bit behind you. A loss of freedom. I've blanked out the name. Someone was saying someone else. I agree. And also folks feeling they are losing their freedom. We all feel that, don't we? We all really are losing our freedoms, aren't we? Imagine saying to yourself a year ago that you were going to be forced to stay at home. You weren't be able to go to work. You weren't going to be able to worship. You weren't going to be able to go on holiday. We would think we'd been moved to North Korea. Now, I'm not saying that it's necessarily wrong that those restrictions have come in, but there is a reality. There is an impact to this loss of freedom. And there's also uncertainty. Perhaps something dealing with uncertainty in general would be useful. We just didn't know what was going to happen. Last Saturday, I heard that the PM was going to be making an announcement, and I, as a church leader, am sat there thinking, what's this going to mean for our church? And we didn't know. We got rumours. We're still not 100% sure what all the rules are. They're kind of coming to us in dribs and drabs. But there is that uncertainty. One day you're allowed to do something, and the next it's lockdown. We probably have a bit more certainty for a month, but nonetheless. Abuse. I would say all of the above. And something that seems to be overlooked a lot is domestic/child abuse. During this time, those who would have had a relief from it when their abuser went to work, out, etc., they're not able to get it. For many, this was their coping mechanism. They're trapped with the abuse 24/7 and in an increasingly tense situation, the fallout from which can be catastrophic. And these things are hidden, aren't they? There's an article on BBC News today about abuse of babies going up at this time. It's always hard to find out who is being abused at the best of times. I used to be a primary school teacher. We had to deal with cases of abuse, and it's very hard to know what's going on. And it is a very difficult process, and hidden, being contained in a household at the moment where stresses are high for every marriage, for every relationship. It just ups the chances of this kind of thing happening. And finally, no spiritual support. Here's another message we got recently. Hi, can you please pray for us? We're currently not part of any church and are struggling to join one and enjoy Christian fellowship with other believers. We're currently watching your Sunday services on YouTube, praying that God will give us strength and encouragement as we seek to find our new church home and family. That came to us before we had to stop live church services, but now every Christian will be feeling that. We love being able to gather together to meet under God's word. It's not the same watching a live stream. Even now, you're probably losing attention from time to time because it is just not the same. And even more than that, we feel that we need to pray with other people, meet with other people, just have those one-on-one conversations over coffee where you ask someone how they're doing and they open up. All that is gone. And that is really giving some limitations to spiritual support. Well, I'd be interested to know in the comments, if you're happy to do this, what do you think is the biggest problem? I guess you don't have to say one of the above. I haven't mentioned the obvious, obviously, the health concerns of COVID-19. I'll talk about a little bit about my experience with that in a second. But beyond, I guess what we're kind of trying to talk about today is beyond the immediate impact of COVID-19 and the health teams, the NHS are doing an amazing job to try and protect that. We all staying at home is doing a job to protect that. But there are all these other issues as well. It's kind of like a second pandemic. And I wonder which of these you would say is the biggest, or which of these you would say are big problems. Some of them are bigger issues, maybe. Abuse would be quite top of that list, wouldn't it? But some of them may be more personal to you, or they may be more widespread. I don't think anyone has mentioned anything so far, but if you feel free to, it'd be helpful. We're going to look at some of these issues in live streams over the next few weeks, so it would really help me figure out which ones to start with, if I get some indication as to what things people find particularly that they would like to hear about. Maybe you're struggling with it, maybe someone you know is struggling with it, maybe you're in a caring profession and you say, look, I'm seeing a lot of this issue. So please do let us know if you have a particular issue. Let me just talk about myself, because I'm asking you to share with me what your issues are, your problems, your worries. And it's only right for me to share some of the things that are going on with me. I'm not going to tell you everything, because nobody would, but it's been a hard few months for me. We obviously, when we went into first lockdown, everything changed, and one of the first things that happened to me was I contracted what I think is a virus, but it was before mass testing, and that was a tough time. I was, as well as having the effects of the disease itself, it had long-lasting effects. I wasn't able to take part in my work for a number of weeks. As some of you will know, you're in our church. I wasn't able to preach for a long time. Wasn't able to give people the support I wanted. It's hard to be in that situation. I don't think I'd ever been in the situation before where I was so dependent on others. You know, I found just walking up the stairs would get me out of breath, and for a long time it took me to fully recover. I think I am so now, but there was that. There's the stresses and strains of being at home all the time, trying to care for young children. We've got a 5-year-old and a 2-year-old, and that's difficult. As we've gone into this second stage of lockdown, my wife is pregnant, as I think most of you probably know by now if you're at the church, and so she's tired, she's exhausted, and we've got no ability to be able to farm the kids off on someone else to give her a bit of a break. There's a lot of pressure on us as a family, so yeah, we're struggling with the loneliness, the not being able to talk to people. We're struggling with some of those mental health issues of feeling anxious, feeling down. To know that church wasn't going to be meeting again, it was discouraging. It was a high point of the week. And this Sunday I will be presenting from the front at church. We're going to be able to meet together to live stream with a small group, but Nat's going to be at home with the kids, and that's going to be really difficult. We particularly feel for our youngest, our little boy, because he is unable to see friends at the moment because he's not school age. So all those things are going on for me. And then as a pastor, I'm dealing with lots of these issues, and some of them, it takes time to figure out how best to support people going through these things, and the whole host of other things that go on in people's lives. So I hope in future weeks we're going to be able to address some of these issues in particular, but what do we do with suffering? How do we explain it? Let me make myself smaller so you can see that better. Here are the explanations I think people mostly have in our world. The first one, they don't really say stuff, but I'm not comfortable with swearing. Stuff happens. This is the world. The world is full of suffering. It's full of pandemics. It's full of natural disasters. It's full of unemployment and disappointment. Now, if that's your view of the world, it's very hard to keep yourself going, because the only thing you can do is just distract yourself. Maybe put on a bit of Netflix, maybe do some things you enjoy, but the reality is that suffering is just going to grow and grow as life goes on. And when you have that perspective, often driven by a view that there is no God, that there is no purpose in life, then it's inevitable that you will end up in the pits of depression. And I suspect many of those who are struggling with the deeper sides of that, it is not exclusively, of course, something that is there for non-Christians, but it is something that drives that kind of hopelessness. If this is all there is, then why would you keep going? Another question would be, why has this happened to me? Many people feel that good things should happen to good people and bad things should happen to bad people. Karma. And when we look at this world, we think, how is it fair that this happens to me? And that can make us feel really discouraged, really down. Another thing is everything happens for a reason. And maybe you said that to someone, maybe someone said that to you. It's hard thinking those things through when you've lost someone you love, when you've lost your job. It's easy to say that from the sidelines. It's very hard to say that in the moment itself. Or what about, shouldn't really be a question mark there, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger? That suffering strengthens us and it empowers us. Well, there maybe is a bit of truth to that, and we'll see that in a moment. But actually stronger for what? What is the purpose? And how can I get any confidence that that's the case? There's some elements of truth to all of these things. Stuff does happen. Suffering does happen. Why would this happen to me? Some things are incredibly unfair. It seems like bad people don't always get what's coming to them, and people who are trying to live their lives the right way, they suffer. Everything happens for a reason, yes, but how can I know that? And how can I let what is happening to me make me stronger? Well, I think that generally there's some things in the Christian faith that can help in times of suffering. Do let me know, by the way. I will keep an eye on the comments. If there's anything you don't understand, if there's anything you want me to go into deeper, we are a few slides from the end. I'm happy to stay on and answer questions if that would be helpful to you. So do plonk them in there if that would be helpful. If not, it's no big deal. So how does Jesus help? Well, firstly, I think what the Bible teaches is really realistic about suffering. This is from the book of Psalms. The book of Psalms is a book of songs and prayers, and they're incredibly personal. Here's a verse that's written in the Psalms. My tears have been my food day and night, while people say to me all day long, where is your God? Often when I have engaged in kind of public debate about Christianity, people coming from the atheistic position will often think that suffering in the world is a slam dunk argument. Christianity doesn't make sense of suffering in the world, and when I look at the Bible, it's the very opposite. The vast majority of books in the Bible deal with suffering in the world. They are incredibly realistic. Tears have been my food day and night. People say to me, where is your God? Those are realities for people of faith. The Bible doesn't shy away from that. It says, this is what happens. I remember when I've been in my worst situations, if I've gone to someone for help, if they quickly jump to, oh, everything's going to be okay, everything's going to be all right, then I don't really pay that much attention to them. I want to know that they understand what I'm going through, that they've got a real sense of what it means for me to suffer. And the Bible does that. Tears have been my food day and night. I bet some of you could own that. But some of you feel like that right now. The Bible's realistic about suffering. Secondly, the Bible does give hope in suffering. Now, this verse has often been misquoted. It has been used as a hammer over someone's head. It says, and we know that in all things, God works for the good of those who love him, who've been called according to his purpose. This is really something deeper than just everything happens for a reason. What doesn't kill you makes you stronger. Why should we believe those things? You know, if there isn't a God, there's no reason to believe that suffering is anything except from random. But if there's a God, then he is using the things that happen in our lives for our good. Now, that doesn't mean that it's always clear at the time. One author says that it's a bit like looking at a tapestry. Think of going to a big National Trust property, seeing one of those great tapestries. If you see it from the front, you can see this beautiful picture. But if you look at it from behind, it's just a knot of strings all over the place. And he says that suffering in this world is a little bit like looking at the back of a tapestry. It just looks like chaos. But in the grand scope of things, we can see it's for our good. My daughter was born prematurely. She was born at 24 weeks gestation, and she was in the hospital a few days old, and she was having an injection into her foot, I believe, and this poor tiny little baby, the kind of size of my two palms, she was writhing in pain, and I was she was holding onto my finger with her tiny little fingers. And I desperately wanted to be able to tell her that what the pain she was suffering was for her good, that she needed this injection if she was going to live. And I felt as if God was reminding me at that time, that he spoke to me through that experience and said, this is how it is for me, for you. The experience you're going through, facing the prospect of potentially losing your daughter, if you saw it from my perspective, you'd see it's for your good. Now, that doesn't mean the Bible's glib about suffering. As we saw, it's deeply realistic. But it does give us a hope that our suffering isn't in vain. Like someone going out for a run and struggling to put one foot in front of the other, it's hard, but in the long run, it's worth it. And the same with suffering. We don't always see why in the immediate situation. But in the long run, if God is in control, then we can know that suffering works for our good. Experience of suffering as well. You could say that there is answers to suffering from any religion that believes in a God, but there's something particular about Christianity. You see, Christianity says that Jesus is God who came in human form. And he didn't wander around as a king. The ancient Greek myths had Zeus going around picking up beautiful women. That's not what Jesus did. He was born in a stable. He was born as a refugee. He suffered. He died on the cross. In short, he knows what it's like. This is what this verse says. We do not have a high priest who is unable to empathize with our weaknesses. But we have one, this is talking of Jesus, who has been tempted in every way just as we are, yet he did not sin. Jesus went through all the kinds of things we went through. Let us then approach God's throne of grace with confidence so that we may receive mercy and find grace to help us in our time of need. Our God has not sat above playing his little puppet show. He has come down and he has experienced suffering with us. So when we speak to our God, we speak to someone who's been there. When I've been in my darkest moments of suffering, I find that I connect well to people who have been through those situations as well. Maybe you can empathise with that. That is why we can turn to God, because Jesus came to earth. He suffered. He experienced things way worse than what we're going through right now. How does Jesus help? Well, he gives us a personal, there is a personal support in suffering. And what I mean here is that there's the church, the people of God are gathered together, and one of the commandments given to Christians as God's people is rejoice with those who rejoice, but also mourn with those who mourn. There is to be this deep fellowship. I don't know whether you've ever experienced it, where you go to tell someone your good news and they're too distracted with their bad news that's going on. Or alternately, you've got bad news and either they've got bad news that they want to talk about, or they've got good news that they want to focus on. People not paying attention. And this verse tells us what life should be like in the church. It's not always perfect. But I must say that I've experienced it, that when I'm suffering, when I'm finding things hard, people have come to help me, to get alongside me. That's the community that Jesus builds, that Jesus offers. So there's that personal support, that human support, but even greater than that, there is a divine support in suffering. I've quoted this one countless times over the past few months, but it bears saying again. Cast all your anxiety on him because he cares for you. Whatever you're worrying about, bring it before God. He knows it already. Even if you're struggling with him, even if you're doubting, you can bring it before him. He knows it already. And he cares for you. He wants you to know. If you're a parent watching this stream, if your child was suffering, wouldn't you want them to pick up the phone and tell you about it? Well, it's the same with our Heavenly Father. God is like our earthly parents on steroids. He is more loving than the best mum, the best dads. And whenever we have an anxiety, we can bring it to him and he will listen and he cares for us. And more importantly, he is all powerful. And so is able to give us what we need either to go through that time of suffering or to help overcome it. And that's why we're so dependent on God in prayer. Oh, I didn't mean to say an explanation of sin. I meant to say an explanation of suffering. Why is suffering here? if you come from an atheist perspective, you just say, well, this is just how the world is. And if that's the case, then there's no light at the end of the tunnel. We've just got to put up with this. Sometimes there'll be ups and downs, but basically, this is as good as it gets. And yet some religious people, even some people claiming to be Christians, kind of treat the world as if it's this perfect magical place with rainbows and unicorns and everything's happy and joyful always. The Bible goes to neither of those extremes. The Bible says the world was created good. It was a place of joy and pleasure. But actually, the world became the way it is because humans turned away from God. Turning away from God meant a few things. When Adam and Eve, the first humans, turned away from God, number one, their relationship with God was damaged. The source of life and goodness and help, they were separated from him because they broke his law. Their relationship with each other was damaged. This husband and wife, they suddenly were ashamed to be in front of each other. And that expands now to the whole of creation. Humans hurt each other. Humans are ashamed of each other. And then the world was ruined. Eve experienced pain in childbirth. Adam experienced thorns and thistles get in the way of his growing crops. And those are just pictures of all the things that have gone wrong in the world. And coronavirus is one of those things. It's not natural in a certain sense. The world shouldn't have diseases in it. But as a result of going away from God, we read in this verse here, we know that the whole creation has been groaning as in the pains of childbirth right up to the present time. Not only so, but we ourselves who have the first fruits of the Spirit groan inwardly as we wait eagerly for our adoption to sonship, the redemption of our bodies. Now, there's obviously some good news in there too, but it makes clear that the world and us, we're groaning at this time, we're moaning, we're in pain. And that's the result of our sin, of our going away from God. Now, let me make this clear. I'm not saying that there's a kind of one-to-one correspondence here. I'm not saying that if somebody has cancer, then they must have been a really bad person. If someone's got a reasonably good life, they've been okay. No, the Bible says that's absolutely not true. But there is things like coronavirus, things like death in the world because we've turned away from God. And therefore our only hope is to come back to him. Jesus offers a solution to sin. He came to earth and he took our suffering dying on the cross. So that even though our suffering in this world isn't taken away, our suffering in the next can be. If you admit that you are a sinner, that you have gone away from God, that's called repenting. And if you believe that Jesus took that penalty for your sin, that's called believing or faith or trusting, then the last part of the story is the best. How does Jesus help? He brings an end to suffering. This passage is about when Jesus comes again and sets the world to rights. And it says this, "And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, 'Look, God's dwelling place is now among the people, and he will dwell with them. They will be his people, and God himself will be with them and be their God. He will wipe every tear from their eyes,'" every tear. "There will be no more death, or mourning, or crying, or pain, for the old order of things has passed away." I cannot guarantee you today that you can have your suffering go away. I can't say to you, we're going to be able to end lockdown if we just keep praying. God has never promised that we will be able to be removed from suffering in this world. Sometimes he graciously answers prayers, but there will be much suffering in however many years you've left on this planet. But what I can tell you in Jesus is that if you trust in him, there will be a day when all those problems we spoke about will be gone. There'll be no unemployment. We will all be employed in serving our God for all eternity in a vast array of different things. There will be no mental health problems. All the tears that we cry will be gone. And there will be no more death. There will be no more fear of getting viruses, of being locked down. That is the future that we have to look for. And that gives us hope, even in our darkest place, because we know that even if things are bad right now, they are going to get better eventually.